Just 8 months on from the federal election, and there's leadership instability within one of the governing parties, that being the Nationals. We'll be speaking to one of the key figures in a moment, Darren Chester, who is one of the most trusted allies of the leader, Michael McCormack. So Darren Chester in a moment. There's also leadership transition looming on another political front, the Greens, although that process is looking much more orderly. Let's get all the latest in terms of the numbers, where it all stands. Our political editor, Andrew Clennell, is with me. Andrew, so who has got the numbers in the National Party as we speak this afternoon?
Well, from best that I can make out, and the Nationals is a hard one to get over, Kieran. It looks like there's a hard 6 in favour of Barnaby Joyce and a soft 9. That's not the 11 of the 21 he requires. If we can bring up who's likely to vote for a spill at the moment, and I have to say that Lou O'Brien's said to be the MP who is agitating in order to get a spill happening, you can see there that someone we believe quite possibly would support Mr Joyce's Cabinet Minister and his former staffer Matt Canavan, but there's a question mark around him and another MP from the Northern Territory. Essentially, Barnaby Joyce trying to push momentum from his morning appearances this morning, trying to convince people, I guess, like someone who's been a friend of his, David Littleproud, to come on board, because if you got someone like him, if you got Canavan, he'd have a chance of actually getting there. But I'd have to say at the moment the consensus is he is a bit of an underdog in this race. The question then becomes, if he can get to 8 or 9 votes, does he go do it anyway, call on the spill anyway, get his supporters to, in order to further destabilise Michael McCormack's leadership and put him in a position for a crack down the track?
Well, let's recap a little of what Barnaby Joyce said during those breakfast interviews that you mentioned there, Andrew.
Obviously, after a spill, there is technically no leader. That is a right in a Westminster system of government. It's up to others if there's a spill. I believe that I've done the job before. Every seat we've got is 101 in the previous election before the one we've just had. But I'll leave that up to my colleagues. They can make the call, and that's where it'll stop.
So do you have colleagues, have you been told that they will make the call for a spill?
I'm not another person. If they choose to do it, they choose to do it. And I would never put a certainty on anything. I've said every time people have asked me that if there's a vacancy, and after a spill there is, that I'd stand. That's nothing new.
Barnaby Joyce on the 7 Network, and it's true he has not hidden away from his ambition to return to that job. And one of the fundamental things in politics, as you well know, Andrew, is you always back the nag called self-interest. So
absolutely,
if he can say to individuals, "You're going to get this and this and this," well, he's still got 24 hours.
Yes, but
or a bit under now, but he's got a day to do it.
And with that adage is the one, you know, you always back the winning side, don't you? And that's why we have some in the undecided column. They're really seeing how the numbers unfold. And I guess it's in both sides' interest to say we're in front, because that's when you can start the domino effect. And I think, you know, Joyce will struggle a bit with that. That's where he needs to be. If he can show he's very close to the numbers and can promise a few jobs around the place, that's where he has a chance to potentially fall over the line.
Andrew, I want to play for our viewers comments by Michael McCormack. This is in relation to a grant in his electorate to a football club where his son is associated with that particular club. Let's have a look.
I've got a question about some funding for an organisation your son's involved in, Mr McCormack, if you've got time.
No, well, I will answer your question, thank you, Mark, and I'll come back to yours.
Can I ask the question first, though?
Sure, well, I actually heard the gist of it.
Yep,
but
good, I'm glad of that.
Nothing to do with my son, nothing to do with me. The fact is, when I found the fact that they had actually applied for the funding, I recused myself from any advocacy, and whilst many of the grants throughout the Riverina and for this and other matters sought my support, the Mangapla Cookadini United East Lakes Goannas Football and Netball Club did not.
Michael McCormack going into a bit of detail in the defence of that particular grant. He's in Cabinet today as we speak, Cabinet meeting ahead of the parliamentary hearing, but that's not stopping some of his colleagues from encouraging a bit of scrutiny of this particular grant. It's interesting, isn't it, because you've got Bridget McKenzie copping it and losing the job because of this grants process, but this is going to provide a bit of fodder, not just for Labor, but for some of the internal opponents as well.
You see the tension here, and you see that some internally are pushing this in order to help the Joyce camp. And that's a very interesting dynamic in all of this. But as what's been said to me, and it's probably a fair point, is McCormack claims that he recused himself. It's still not a great look at all. His son's club got the grant, but the difference with the McKenzie case and the gun clubs is that he wasn't the actual decision maker. McKenzie was the decision maker in terms of the club she was involved with, and that led to the end of her. She actually addressed, Kieran, this issue a bit, I think, and also any Prime Ministerial or other ministers' involvement by taking full responsibility at a press conference earlier today. Let's listen to that.
I take responsibility for all my decisions, and I signed the resignation letter yesterday. I signed off on 684 sporting programs that I know are making a difference in communities right now. You know, the breach of ministerial standards was clear. I should have declared those memberships in a more timely fashion.
Bridget McKenzie there, reiterating what she said in her statement yesterday, accepting responsibility, but says that those memberships didn't affect her judgment. However, the question is now, where will she fall in terms of this leadership question, which you would have to assume will come to a spill tomorrow if Barnaby Joyce is anywhere above 6 or 7. I guess that's the one we need to ponder on. When will the spill happen?
Yeah.
He needs to have a credible number in order for that to happen.
So I think we can safely assume if the spill doesn't go ahead, he's only got 5 or 6 or maybe 7 votes.
Just reminding our viewers, they've got 21
in the
21 in the party room.
So because then he'd just be embarrassed, humiliated. If he's got, you know, obviously a majority or very close to, quite a likely chance it'll go ahead. So it's kind of that race between 6 and 11 at the moment. And yes, Bridget McKenzie there. I mean, she, I think, from talking to a number of people, would be inclined to vote for Joyce. I mean, she hasn't said that. She hasn't said otherwise, but it's been put to me that she feels a bit hard done by Michael McCormack, and she'd be inclined to go the other way, potentially, Kieran.
Yeah, and Andrew, when it comes to those numbers we're talking about, 21 in the Nationals party room, but you're right when you say that anywhere between 9 and sort of that 9, 10, 11, well 11 he's got the numbers, but just under that, it's almost a mortal blow for McCormack in a political sense if Joyce could get that close. If it's 5 or 6, I know we're talking about small numbers, but still...
it's crazy such small numbers.
But symbolically, it's huge. If he can only get 5 or 6, well then Joyce is almost embarrassed by that sort of number because that's all he's ever had previously.
Well, I reckon there are 11 Nationals MPs who are not happy with Michael McCormack's performance. But there are potentially 11 Nationals MPs who aren't prepared to take the leap to Barnaby Joyce. And, you know, David Littleproud's made clear to colleagues that he's not running, so there's no alternative. He's in it for the long game.
One of the interesting scenarios here is to consider how many of the new MPs would stick with the leader or go to change, because my sense of things would be that if they're new to Parliament, they're not necessarily going to be of the motivation to be saying, look, let's dump the leader under which I got a seat in this place. 4 of those new MPs are women, 1 man, 5 new faces at the last election. Just which way will they go, I think, is an important question here.
Well, it's a very good point, Kieran, because it's almost a fight over them. I mean, they're the ones you want to get on board. If McCormack can lock them down, it's fair to say he's safe.
And let's look at the Greens quickly now, if we can, before we move on to some other discussions, including with Darren Chester. But Richard Di Natale, he's announced he's quitting Parliament.
Yeah, let's have a look at this. I mean, I saw I saw Richard Di Natale last night, in fact, at a restaurant in Canberra with his young children. And sure enough, he's brought his wife and children here to say it's for family reasons I'm stepping down after 10 years in Parliament, 5 years as Greens leader. Let's have a look at what he had to say.
Today I've made one of the most difficult decisions that I've ever had to make, and I've announced to my party room colleagues that I'm resigning as parliamentary leader of the Australian Greens. It's a tough and demanding job, and my boys are 9 and 11. I want to be present in their lives. My wife has been a huge support for me in my career. I want to be able to support her in her career.
And you can understand 9 and 11-year-old boys. I think this is one of those scenarios where I'm resigning for family time is actually 100% legitimate in this particular case of Richard Di Natale. And just behind him, Adam Bandt was standing there, and he's in the box seat as well to take on the job, isn't he, of leader?
Yeah, it's been put to me that Di Natale didn't want to do another hard election campaign, and having Bandt and Larissa Waters, it looks like a Bandt-Waters ticket. Behind him was clearly strategic, and it looks like it's been sewn up here, Kieran, a bit like when Christine Milne handed over to Richard Di Natale. Very much an endorsement, and only going Di Natale when he was sure Adam Bandt had the numbers. So we could actually have a situation where we were looking this morning at 2 possible leadership spills tomorrow. There could be a chance we get neither or none. One very interesting point that Richard Di Natale made in that press conference was about the strength of the minor parties in Australia at the moment. We saw in the news poll the government behind 52 to 48 this morning. However, Labor's primary vote was a paltry 35. The coalition's admittedly was 38. You can't get to 52 with 35 generally. And you had a situation where the Greens were on 13%. So we're almost in the position with an Albanese opposition where you'd have to have a Labor-Greens block vote in order to get there. Let's see what Di Natale had to say about the situation with the voting.
Over the past 30 years, the vote for both major parties has been on the decline. It's falling off a cliff. And the vote for third parties is increasing. The last few elections have been won by, a seat or two. We're going to have to get used to power-sharing parliaments in Australia. That is the future for Australian parliaments. And when we achieve that, what you're going to see is a different sort of politics that produces the sort of results we got in 2010.
And it's something we see right around the world. Of course, Germany, New Zealand come to mind as well in terms of power-sharing arrangements where parties don't necessarily get a majority and they've got to work in coalition with other like-minded parties. And this, whether or not it's a formal coalition or not, looks like it's going to be the reality between those two parties of the left.
Yeah, a relatively new situation in Australia, I guess. Since about 2010, we've had either 1 or 2 seat majorities or this kind of situation with we had the minority government. Normally, previously it had been pretty decisive results, except maybe 1961 was a 1-seat win. But look, an interesting thing about this Greens situation with the leadership, not everyone in the Greens is happy with this, that it appears a stitch-up. If we can bring up a tweet from Senator Marine Faruqi, she is representing the New South Wales Greens' views on this, which is she would not like to see the party room decide the leader. She says, I've consistently supported Greens members having a democratic say in our party leadership and called for co-leaders. She's basically calling selecting our leader is a great opportunity to involve members. The party should be doing just that for this ballot. She and other people in New South Wales would like to see the sort of vote the Democrats, I think, used to have, which is a vote of the lay members of the party, and we know that Labor has a bit of that now. That's not the case. That's not what's happening here. It's all been a succession plan from Richard Di Natale, it seems.
Andrew, thank you. We'll talk to you right throughout the afternoon.